Hello and welcome to the Tillage Edge with me, Michael Hennessy. In this episode, I'll be discussing spring cereal weed control strategies with Eoin Lyons, who's working on the Teagasc Boortmalt Joint programme. I first asked Eoin how spring cereals are looking out there at the moment.
Yeah, so I suppose the majority of the crops that I'd be looking at would be the spring malt and barley. And look, I suppose the majority went in there around that late March time, and when the weather took up there and seedbeds dried out considerably. And I suppose for the most part, establishment was excellent, but there are a few crops out there where I suppose seabeds were overly cloddy and they didn't break down well pre-sow, and plant counts have taken a hit because of that. So look, the majority of crops are up around that 300 plants per square meter, but there are crops down as low as 200 plants, so they are a concern. But I suppose the progression and the growth of these crops, they're coming up now, I suppose, on the 4-leaf stage, or maybe the 3-leaf with a tiller coming. And really, we are looking now at the ideal timing for herbicide to be applied. I suppose one thing with crops is now lack of moisture. They are looking at them. I suppose last week there was a good deal of moisture down in the seabed, because most seabeds were rolled post drilling. It allowed that moisture to be locked in. But as this week progresses, we see that moisture is slowly getting deeper and deeper in the seabed, and the roots can't access it. So crops are starting to struggle for that bit of moisture. And I suppose from a weed point of view is that flush of weeds is not there at the moment to actually go in and put on your herbicide, because there's just not enough weeds present to kill. But hopefully in the next few days that rain is due to come, and we get good crop and weed growth and get our herbicides applied.
Okay, so I suppose weeds aren't there, number one, and crops are a little bit delicate. So trying to get the crop to look a bit stronger might be the first thing. But we know that we're going to have to control weeds at some stage. So how should a farmer decide upon the best strategy for particular fields?
Yeah, so look, I suppose there's a number of steps that a grower should think about before deciding on what herbicides to use on particular fields on the farm. And I suppose the first and the overall kind of concept of all these steps is your IPM approach, or integrated pest management. So IPM starts before we go and look for a can of herbicide to kill the weed within the crop. So I'm talking about things like getting our stale seabeds, getting all our grass weeds controlled with pre-ploughing or pre-cultivation, and then trying to look at things at picking the right product to control the weeds we have. And I suppose coming out from that, then we want to look at different aspects such as our history. So what type of weeds have we seen in that field before in other years growing cereals? Then we want to look at our crop growth. So as I said there before, what stage the crop is at. And ideally, we want to be at that 4-leaf stage, or maybe 3 leaves with a tiller coming. Thirdly, then, we want to identify the weeds that are present within the field, so that we pick a herbicide that will kill the weed that we have. Okay, because weeds will differ depending on where we are in the country, or what type of soil type or field type that a grower might have. Then it's always good then to look at the previous herbicides that we used on the farm. So most fields will probably have the same kind of reoccurring weeds. So if a herbicide worked well before, the chances are it will work well now. So it's good to look back and see what we used in previous years. Then it's how the crop is growing, but also how the weed is growing will influence what way we apply our herbicides as well. So ideally, we're looking for both the crop and the weed to be actively growing. So look, it can be difficult, but if we can manage it to get 3 good days pre application of a herbicide, 3 good growth days, and 3 good growth days after we apply a herbicide, to ensure that the actively growing weed can take in the herbicide that's applied, and also the actively growing crop will be limited as regards stress, because as we know, like, herbicides are a stress to the crop, and we want, especially in spring barley, because it's such a short growing period, we want to eliminate as much stress as possible from the crop, if at all possible.
Okay, so you have I suppose, various different herbicides there, and you're talking about various different the histories of fields and that kind of thing. But could a farmer be tempted just to say, well, you know what, I'm just going to do a blanket treatment on all of my area?
Well, look, it's very tempting to say that I would just go in and buy all the chemical I need for all the area of spring barley. But I suppose a word of caution with that, as I said, it's about identifying the weeds that we have within the field. So if one field has, say, a bad poppy issue, and maybe another field might have a bad a marigold or something like that, it's about identifying the fields and then identifying which herbicide I can apply to the fields for best control. So look, if all the fields within the farm have the same similar type weed issues, well then a blanket approach could be the way to go about controlling the weeds. But if not, it is best practice, I suppose, to try and find the best suited herbicide for the weed problem.
Okay, so you mentioned there's different herbicides there. What are those main types of herbicides, and is it necessary to combine those herbicides into one application?
Yeah, so I suppose the types of herbicides first. There's really two types of herbicides that we use on spring barley, and these consist of your SUs, or your sulfonylureas, which usually come in that smaller 100-gram pack. And also the hormonal-based herbicides, which usually come in your 5-litre can, or your bigger can compared to the SUs. And really, what the sulfonylureas are, they're kind of the most common herbicides that are used on spring barley, and they're a broad-ranging herbicide. They will control a large number of weeds. And the type of herbicides that I'll be talking about that come under that SU banner is kind of your Alley Maxes, your Cameo Max, Harmony Max, and there's a wide range of others that are also the same. But the thing is with the SUs, they won't kill everything. Although they're broad, there's still some weeds that they cannot kill. And this is where our hormonal herbicides come in. So really, a hormonal herbicide on its own, it really has a very narrow spectrum of weeds that it can control. But when we mix the two together, so put your SU and your hormonal together at the correct rates, we can get a very wide range of weeds controlled within the crops. So to answer your question, it really is vital that we mix both the SU and the hormonal herbicides together in order to ensure that we get complete control of weeds in the spring barley and make sure that yield is not affected.
Okay, so you mentioned there that some herbicides can be good on one weed and other herbicides can be good on another weed. How does a grower figure out that? How does he know where to find that information?
Yeah, so on each can of either any type of herbicide, there will be on the label, there will be a list of all the weeds that may be in a crop of spring barley, and on that it'll give how that herbicide will control that particular weed given it's applied at the recommended rate. Okay, so listed then amongst them underneath all these weeds it's given a rating. So it's either listed as S, M, or R. So S is susceptible, so the weed is susceptible to that herbicide. MS then is moderately susceptible, or R is resistant or poor control. So it's important that a grower would look at these tables after identifying the weeds that are within the field, to look at the table and see, will this herbicide kill the weed that I have? And I suppose it's important there just on I mentioned the R stands for resistant or poor control, that R is, it's not that the weed is resistant, it's just that particular herbicide has poor control on that weed, or will not control it. Whereas if we look at a different herbicide, we could get very good control of that particular weed.
Okay, so when you mentioned you have S for susceptible, you have MS for moderately susceptible, and you have MR and R as well. So if one of my weeds or a number of my weeds end up in the moderately susceptible category, is it a case that I need to look at a hormone that has a good susceptibility on those particular weeds and match the two of them together so that we get good control?
Yeah, exactly. So this is where our mixing really comes in. So look, I mentioned that the SU or sulfonylurea will cover that broad range. But as you say, if you come up and you see on the chart that there is an MS beside the sulfonylurea, that's when we have to look at our hormonal base and pull that in to fill in the gaps, basically. Okay, so just to give, I suppose, an example of that would be a product, Pixaro, which wouldn't be considered a fairly broad range. It's very select, but it does have good activity on resistant chickweed, just to give an example that maybe other chemistry wouldn't be good on.
So that you mentioned resistance now. So you're talking about, I presume, true resistance to a herbicide that probably should kill that weed. What are the main weeds that are out there that guys should be looking for that we know are resistant? And maybe a second part of that is, how does a farmer prevent that happening on the ground?
Yeah, I suppose just before I get into the kind of common resistant weeds that we have here in crops in Ireland, just I suppose to give an insight into what resistance really is. So I suppose resistance in itself is when the application of the particular herbicide that's applied to the crop does not kill the target weed that we had intended it to kill. Okay, so it is a serious problem if you do see it in fields. And I suppose how to spot it if we do have resistance within the field is to, after application of the herbicide, to go out and inspect the field and try and find a cluster of particular weeds that are of the same species. And if you notice on the ground that there's one weed that has been controlled, that is actually dying, and beside it there is the same type weed that is still green and has not been harmed by the herbicide, well, then we know that particular weed could be of a resistant strain, and we may need to look at changing up the chemistry for the following year in order to try and control that. But I suppose on top of that then is to try and remember back then to what maybe from last harvest, to see, did we see anything in the stubbles maybe when the corn was cut, any weeds that maybe came through that didn't get good control, and that maybe looking forward to weed control this year, we might try and find a herbicide that could actually kill that weed that might be present. So look, the kind of weeds that I'm talking about that may be resistant in tillage crops here in Ireland is kind of weeds like corn marigold, chickweed, and poppy, and weeds like this. But like, although they're resistant, there is chemical out there that will have good activity on these particular weeds. So if in corn marigold's case, if you get a product like Galaxy, or chickweed, as I said, Pixaro, it has good activity on that. So although it is bad to have a resistant weed, and no one wants resistant weed within the crop, there is hormonal based chemicals out there that can give control.
So Eoin, would I be right in saying that that resistance that you say to waterside or chickweed or marigold or poppy, that it's actually resistant to the sulfonylureas, so the alleys or the cameos or the harmonies? Yeah. And that if it's resistant to one, the chances are it's pretty well resistant to all of the sulfonylureas.
Yeah, more than likely. We have to try and look at a hormonal base to try and control that.
Different, coming from a different direction, a different active.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay. So look, just to the last one I really want to chat about a little bit is that there's lots of wild oats out there as well. They need to be controlled. What sort of timing should we go for those? Can be all done together, or does it need to be in a sequence?
Yeah, so I suppose the straightforward question to that is yes, it can be done with your broadleaf weed control in most cases, but there are some broadleaf herbicides which are not compatible with your wild oat herbicide, and the type of herbicide I'm talking about is type of your MCPA or CMPP, and really they can't be mixed or you won't get good wild oat control. Now, some growers maybe they might like to go at maybe the 2-leaf stage if you're putting on an aphicide and go with your wild oat control then, or maybe they might leave it till your T1 timing after your broadleaf weed control. But it's just important that there is intervals between applying your wild oat herbicide separately and applying your broadleaf weed control herbicide. So it's important that we look at the product labels and make sure that them intervals are maintained. But just if there is growers that are putting it in with their broadleaf weed herbicide, it's good to remember that it is an extra herbicide in the tank, so it is that extra stress on the crop. And I talked about avoiding stress for spring barley. So it's vital that excellent, good growing conditions are there to ensure stress is eliminated. And the final point on wild oats is that if we are applying it with our broadleaf weeds, is that full rates must be maintained of your wild oat herbicide. And just the example of this is your Axial Pro, which is probably the main wild oat herbicide that growers will be applying. So it's important that that 0.6 rate, 0.6 litre per hectare, that full rate is applied in that instance.
Okay, Owen, look, that's brilliant. And maybe just a couple of things that kind of struck me in the conversation as we're talking about it. First, I think is that we guys really need to get out in fields and identify the weeds that they have in front of them. And the second one is to try and hit weeds at a young and early stage if they can. And you also said a thing there which I thought was very interesting, that if we can manage to have about 3 good days of growth before you apply herbicide and 3 good days afterwards, you're probably going to get the best from any applied herbicide.
Absolutely, yeah.
Owen, thank you very much, and we'll be chatting to you again. That's it for the Tillage Edge this week, and my thanks to Eoin Lyons for joining me on the podcast. Don't forget to rate, review, and subscribe on Apple Podcast or Spotify so you never miss an episode. And for more farming information, go to teagasc.ie. I'm Michael Hennessy. Thanks for listening, and I'll be back next week with more tillage news and advice.